Welcome to Liner Notes. My name is David Bixler. Pianist Eric Reed calls on tenor saxophonist Eric Alexander, trumpeter Nicholas Payton, bassist Peter Washington, and drummer Joe Farnsworth to join him on his new recording, Out Late, on Smoke Sessions Records. The record, which will be available on May 16th, features 7 originals that were intended to get this group of well-known musicians out of their comfort zones. In addition to our conversation in this episode of Liner Notes, Eric uses the piano to give the listener a behind-the-scenes peek into his process and musical thought life. Eric Reed, good morning. Welcome to Liner Notes. Thank you for taking the time to share your humanity and your music with us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, David. I appreciate it.
All right. So we are here to talk about and celebrate your new recording, Out Late. Available May 16th on Smoke Sessions, which features a stellar band of yourself, piano and composer, Eric Alexander on tenor, Nicholas Payton on trumpet, comprising the front line, and then rounding out the rhythm section are Peter Washington, who I read you guys went to the same high school, even though you were a few years apart, and Joe Farnsworth. So, I want to jump in with this music. First couple, Glow and Laughing Still at All You Mets, which I first looked at it and I was wondering if this was like the Upper Manhattan Medical Group, which it is not, clearly. It's some All of Me. And, I want to just talk about taking these standard chord progressions that everyone's been playing for years, putting your own spin on it, and then having, like your friends, your colleagues, just kind of cut loose on them.
Well, Glow is really just an 8-bar loop. And it's sort of, when I was writing it, I could sort of see, like if you think about the sky at night and stars and the moon, there's this kind of expanding and contracting of what you see in the sky. And a glow, it implies something that's active and ongoing and constantly moving. So when I wrote it, that's what I had in mind. So and it's supposed to just be sort of a cycle. It doesn't really resolve until the very end. So when you hear us all soloing, we're all soloing and having the conversation just through that 8-bar cycle. And it's really more of a sketch. I call it more of a sketch than a composition. And that was sort of my overall approach to the album, with the exception of something far more detailed, like All Your MFers and the other one.
Delightful Daddy?
Delightful Daddy, thank you.
And man, what I was, I was just asking like my friend here, because it seems like I couldn't figure out what tune that was. It was eluding me, but both you and Peyton allude to the melody, but I just couldn't grab it. So
It's from, it has to be over 100 years old. It's got to be from the 1920s. It's Melancholy Baby.
yes, okay, yeah, right, man.
And oddly enough, nobody else in the band, I mean, they'd maybe heard it once or twice, and they were familiar with it. They just weren't 100% certain of what it was, because that
Right.
was one of those compositions that kind of went out of vogue early on. So something like, how it is in jazz, some songs stay in the repertoire even through jam sessions today, something like Cherokee.
Right.
Cherokee has stayed in the pantheon for decades, but something like Out of Nowhere or After You've Gone, My Melancholy Baby, those have kind of been put aside, and they'll resurface every now and again. But I came across My Melancholy Baby. It's a song that I've always liked, obviously from the movie, mm, I wanna say The Roaring Twenties or Public Enemy. I think The Roaring Twenties with James Cagney, Humphrey Bogart, and I can see her face, but she sang the song in the movie, and I think that's where the song first made its debut, and I've always liked those chord changes, and I kind of dusted it off during COVID, and I remember like it was yesterday, and I think every jazz musician that I know all had the same revelation. In March 12, 2020, we were like, so the gigs are gone, and all we have is our instruments in our practice rooms. So now we have all of this amazing time to do nothing but practice and revamp and pivot as the whole world did, as at least all of America. So for the jazz musician, what that meant for us was, okay, finally, the time to spend with our instruments, the hours that we lose traveling, being family people, uh, going to the gig, getting ready for the gig, rehearsing for the gig. Now we can put all of that into practicing and trying to figure out what the next move is. So Melancholy Baby became a favorite of mine. Just one of those things. It was another one that I practiced a lot, trying to work on tempos and taking songs through different keys. And that's how I came up with Delightful Daddy. The melody for Delightful Daddy uh, came up about maybe 3 years later.
Cool. Yeah, I think I know Melancholy Baby from, Bugs Bunny. Like, he used to sing it when he was drunk or pretending he was drunk, you know? Um, the thing that I thought is interesting because I would look at this lineup, all you guys are phenomenal players, but, thinking, this is gonna be your typical kinda, like, post-bop, hard bop record. But right away, you come out with this conversation. And, I had read that you had kind of like a reaction or a backlash to the environment you grew up musically, like coming up and like what is supposed to be. And this seems to be, maybe kind of a statement, that we can deal with this music, we can deal with harmony, we can deal with time, but we don't have to have the prescripted, okay, you get 2 choruses, you're gonna have 3 choruses, and then we're gonna trade eights, and then we're gonna go out. So, like, how are you conveying this to your bandmates? That this is gonna be a little bit different than what we might do typically.
It's interesting because that was the only aspect of the recording that was intentional. The idea of coming in there, knowing who we've all been for the past 30, 40 years of our careers, the recordings we've made, and knowing what people who hear us and know how we sound, knowing what they'll probably expect, but knowing that the music that I composed was not going to be in that vein. And I knew for a fact that as soon as people saw the lineup, they were going to think, okay, we know what to expect here, which would work against us. So I'm just hoping that people will listen first and go, oh, eh, wait a minute, that sounds like so and so. Is that so and so? And there was a way to do that by putting songs in uncommon keys and creating different compositional forms. Uh, and this wasn't me trying to dive into or near the world of avant-garde and Ornette Coleman, Eric Dolphy, and Mingus, who truly challenged compositional form and just compositions in general in jazz music. All I was trying to do was just throw a few little curveballs at these musicians who could eat changes and tempos for breakfast. That's fine. We all know you know how to do this, 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 and this. Why don't we put this in B major, which is not a very common key that anybody plays in. You're not even going to find classical music repertoire in the key of B major all that often. You'll find some, but not a whole lot. Um, and certainly not gospel music or even R&B or pop. Most things are just not in B major in American music. Most things, most things. So I said, well, you know what? That's going to be a different sound for a jazz recording. Let's put this in A major. That's going to be a different sound for a jazz recording. And we didn't have 2 or 3 days of an organized rehearsal. You know, I brought everything in. I sent them the music so they could become familiar with it, but they had no idea what the concept was. All I needed them to do was just get the notes under their fingers and having and not be singing for the first time. When we came into the studio, though, there was still a great deal of hesitation in terms of, well, what am I supposed to play here? What do I do here? I said, whatever you want. I had some specific uh, details, like we had to figure out what the solo order was going to be. But if it changed, that was going to be okay. Um, I basically said, hey, let's just, on this tune, on the tune Glow, let's just play until we stop playing. And again, these aren't brand new, groundbreaking ideas. I'm still pulling from inspiration from people like Miles Davis, obviously, in terms of his ensemble work, in terms of his ensemble concept. Still pulling from Ahmad Jamal. Still pulling from uh, Paul Bley and Keith Jarrett, still pulling from all the heroes, all the musicians who have created this music, and Charlie Parker, still pulling from that, but trying to interpret it in a way that takes us a little bit out of our comfort zone, but still allows us to sound good. And we were all pleasantly surprised. Not surprised that we could play or sound good, but pleasantly surprised at the end result. It's like, wow, this we're so used to, you know, not going on autopilot, but we're so used to just producing on a high level in certain situations. Here was a situation where we kind of had to step back and be a little bit careful and force ourselves to not play the things that we normally play over certain chord changes.
Yeah. Which in I think it's very effective in maybe, pulling people out of their comfort zone, which is what's really exciting about this music, you know?
Thank you.
So that's super cool. You talk about going into the studio. So the studio was actually smoke during the day?
Yes, or just like Rudy Van Gelder's living room wasn't exactly a studio, but yes, I mean, if you have a room that is a decent sounding room that has some live aspects, has some dryness, and you have high quality equipment, a good microphone, good recording, and an engineer who knows how to make instruments sound good, then you could record a record, like I said, like Rudy Van Gelder did in his parents' living room. I believe contemporary records, Lester Koenig, in the 1950s and 60s. That was basically like the storage room. And you see all the musicians kind of cramped. If you look at pictures, they're kind of cramped, all like in the same space, but in one mic per instrument. And then every now and again, you might see, a filing cabinet off in the corner, Um, you don't need to be at a $500 an hour studio to get the highest quality. If if somebody knows what they're doing, you can make it happen. But one of the reasons that Smoke's room worked so well was because I wanted us all in the same room. I'm not a huge fan of recording in the studio and isolation and being in booths and using headphones, as you see the issue I was having with the headphones this morning, just like, just something as simple as that. It's just a drag, but it is what it is. You have to do what you have to do. But all of us being in the same room and musicians who know how to play a room, we know how to adjust to adjust our own volume and our own dynamics. And that to me added to the allure to even the mystique, if you will, of this recording. And everything was one take. Not perfect. And when I say perfect, like there were a few mistakes, and technically they are mistakes, but they weren't notes that were played that bothered me to the point where, like, you know what? Let's do that again because the both of you didn't play the same notes. It's not classical music, whereas it's gonna be super obvious and it's gonna just sound wrong. But in jazz, we're given the agency, the license to allow for that, knowing that it's not a perfect music. And it's not lackadaisical. It's not being uh negligent or anything like that. It's like, hey, you know what? It's jazz music. We're allowed to do this. As a matter of fact, it's almost expected. I believe somebody was it was either Coleman Hawkins or it was Coleman Hawkins who allegedly said, if you're not making any mistakes, you're not trying hard enough. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, from what you said, that was kind of the purpose of this record, to get the guys out of their comfort zone and, so that you can have some stuff that's raw, but, that's also the stuff that makes it exciting and, intriguing.
And raw is the perfect word. I like raw. Raw to me is when you think about um, foods and you think about agriculture, things in their rawest, purest form with imperfections. You know, it's that's the source you draw from before it becomes synthesized and processed. The processed stuff is what's killing us.
Yeah, definitely, man. Earlier you threw out Keith Jarrett's name. That the tune "Out Late," when I heard that, that might have had kind of like Keith Jarrett, the Dewey Redman vibe. Was that inspiration at all for that one?
I have to think of yeah, there's definitely some Keith in there. John Lewis, I love John Lewis. With a song like that, because of the way the chord changes move, ah, ah. It's got that kind of like if you think of ah, it's an Amma Jamal tune called The Awakening. I'm not playing it right. Uh but it's got that 1970s kind of folk, straight eighth, Charles Lloyd, Keith Jarrett, uh, that kind of vibe, the way those chord changes move. And I'm always reminded of maybe just a little bit of that rock influence as well. Or when you listen Jimi Hendrix, when you listen to Mademoiselle Mabry, Miles
Mhm.
Davis,
Yep.
that same kind of thing. Just these triads.
Yeah.
And For me, when you're playing on triads, then the bebop language doesn't work as effectively because the bebop language it's using all of the chromatics in between. So I was trying to avoid too much of that, and I was really trying to be more diatonic, just playing specifically the notes in each chord. So I was trying to avoid that. I was trying. Try and be super melodic. And you can obviously you can be melodic in the bebop language as well, but the bebop language is so specific, it takes you into that sound. And this isn't a bebop to me, you know. And it never goes to 4/4. It always stays broken. Da ka da ba ba da ba 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 da dee da da dee da dig a dee da ka dee da ka dee da ka da ba ka dee da ka da So changing the groove, that was something that I was specific about with Peter Washington and with Joe Farnsworth, that I didn't want it to go to 4/4 unless it was going to happen organically. But the way we were playing, there was really no way for it to get there. You would have had to force it, which is why I wanted it to stay broken. And again, it's a comfort zone thing because Joe, it was that this tune was particularly challenging because I had written it out in sort of a through composed way. The first section was just the melody. There was that section. Then the next section was the bass solo, which started. It introduced a new little chord progression just towards the end of the form to take us back to the top of the next chorus. And then Peter Washington's second chorus was what started the song form that we all played on. So it was just a little weird. And then the way I write charts, I always make sure, or I try to make sure, that the melody is spread all throughout the chart. So in other words, we have the melody that we play up front. But I also had that melody, that same melody, written in everybody's part over the blowing changes. But I reduced the size to like maybe 75%. And that's supposed to indicate that that's not something you're supposed to play. It's just letting you know what's going on there over these chord changes, sort of like a cue or a reference. And it's a story that Freddie Hubbard told me once when he was playing with Thelonious Monk. Played a couple gigs with him. And he had started soloing after they played the head, and then Monk stopped him. And he said, if you're not going to play the tune, don't play. And Freddie Hubbard's like, I'm reading the chord changes. Monk, is this F sharp? Monk said, yeah. Is that D flat? Monk said, yeah. So they start playing again. Hub starts doing his Hub stuff. Monk said, just whatever. And Hub didn't really understand what Monk was trying to tell him. And then he realized through playing with Eric Dolphy on those recordings, he even said, I think in the liner notes, and he repeated it to me later on, he said, I was trying to play chord changes. That's what I had worked my entire life on, was really just becoming harmonically astute, playing chord and nailing those chord changes. And that particular music wasn't about playing chord changes. And that was the approach he was taking to Freddie Hubbard, to Thelonious Monk's music, that he was playing the chord changes fine, but he wasn't playing the tune. So if you play something like something like oh shoot you can just play over chord changes, or You can play off of the melody of the song, and this is what Monk was trying to get Hub to do. Don't just play chord changes just because you know how to play on chord changes. And that gets us back to Out Late. We had to stick close to the melody because it was new. It wasn't a tune that was based on anything, any kind of contrafact. It was an original composition, and it wasn't something that they had spent their careers playing. You know, they could play chord changes, and they knew how to read music, but this particular song was not right something they could just, like, reach in their pocket and say, "Okay, I know I got something for this." They had to sit back and go, "Huh, okay, I see what's happening here." And they were they sounded great, but you can definitely tell there's some we're being a little careful here.
Very cool. I want to talk about your journey as a pianist. I read that you started playing gospel music at 5, which is kind of mind blowing. But maybe talk about your journey, and then you were in Philly, and then I read that you had moved to LA, and that was kind of where you grew up. Did you have like someone that was mentoring you as a jazz pianist, or were you taking classical piano lessons at that time, or are you just like discovering on your own?
Well, when I was 2 years old was when I started playing piano in Philadelphia. 2. I was 2. And my next door neighbor was best friends with a well-known jazz pianist from Philadelphia by the name of Bobby Timmons. Bobby used to come around to the house and visit. And the story that I was told, of course, there are no pictures. Why would there be? Uh,
No Facebook, man.
no, not back then. But from what I was told, Bobby used to put me on his lap and put my fingers on top of his fingers. And the only thing I remember, for whatever reason, I have no idea why I remember this, was that it felt like metal rods because his fingers were long and skinny. And I remember and it was a little creepy for me. I don't want to do it. But he put my fingers on top of his and then just kind of just, you know, play along. This is the story that I was told, and I have no reason to doubt it. And it's a great story. So whether it's true or not is the one I'm sticking with. But yeah, it's this is what I was told. And it's not like he came by every day. Like he'd visit, a couple times a year. And then of course he died not too long after that. Somebody said there was a picture. I mean, at this point, it's starting to venture into urban legend. I don't know. I wish I could find it though. Gosh, that'd be a great picture.
Oh yeah, no doubt, man.
So, my father was a preacher. My father sang in gospel quartets, and he'd be on the bill with people like Sam Cooke, and Lou Rawls and Johnny Taylor back in the late 50s, early 60s. And we grew up with all kinds of music in the house, a lot of gospel music, James Cleveland, the Davis sisters, the Clara Ward singers. My father used to travel with the Ward singers. Um, and then the contemporary gospel music of the period, Walter Hawkins, Evan Hawkins, Andre Crouch, Myrna Summers. And around 5 years old, after hearing all that gospel music, because, we were in a Baptist church. So I was playing things like, so I had heard this enough to be able to just kind of just play it before I'd even learned how to read music. And then we'd do stuff like so after hearing that was just the sound that I was, working with. And then once I started taking classical lessons for a few years, I'd get into some of the easier Bach pieces. All of that. So, but then there was a watershed moment. My mom's brother and sister were both school teachers. They're both educators. And they would give me old textbooks and National Geographic magazines. And they knew I played piano. So they would go to flea markets and Back then, you could get an inch of records for a quarter. No matter what the record was, an inch, they measure it, you give them a quarter, send you on your way. In this inch of records was a mint condition pressing of Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers live at the Cafe Bohemia. And the vinyl was this thick.
And listener, you can't see this, but he's holding his fingers about 3 inches apart.
That beautiful, warm, heavy vinyl that just feels so amazing in your hand and sounds so great on your turntable. Um, and I still have it to this day. It's one of my prized possessions. There was a Japanese collector who wanted to give me $10,000 for it at a time when I was broke. And I said, as much as I need this money, I'm gonna have to pass. And I'm glad I did, because it's still something that I, value to this day. And it still sounds great. And it was Horace Silver on piano. And that was the first jazz piano solo I transcribed. And by ear, I didn't write it down. Ah. It's been a while.
You still got it. Yeah.
It was giving me some trouble there. Off of Soft Winds. And when I heard that, that just opened my world up harmonically, because I was like, wait a minute, the stuff he's playing sounds like stuff that I play in church, but he's adding another whole thing. What's going on here? The other two records were Ramsey Lewis, Sounds of Christmas, another gospel blues influenced jazz musician. And so, Merry Christmas, baby. So with all of that, I was like, oh, yeah, 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 yeah. And then the other one was Dave Brubeck, Time Further Out, the sequel to Time Out. And I said, all three of these piano players, very percussive. And that's really what stuck out for me. And then I was a jazz fan for life. At that point, I had gotten bitten by the jazz bug, and it was a wrap at that point. But I still played in church because I didn't know, I didn't really have the access to other jazz musicians. Like, even though Christian McBride and Dwayne Burno and Orrin Evans and I all grew up in Philly. I left Philly when I was 11. So I didn't really get into jazz professionally until I moved to Los Angeles, where I encountered people like Clara Bryant and Teddy Edwards and Leroy Vinegar and Rhett Callender and Buddy Collette and Gerald Wiggins, musicians who I didn't know were legends until much later on. But they took me under their wing and really guided me through the process of emerging. I don't want to say becoming, emerging as a professional jazz musician. Harold Batiste was a mentor early on. So I had the gospel and the jazz running parallel with each other, but clearly jazz was, moving further and further ahead in the race.
That's pretty phenomenal for a quarter. That was in that inch of records, man. That's a great story. I want to bring the conversation to teaching. I saw online that you're teaching at University in Knoxville. Is that currently?
I was until May of 2024, but I
All
moved
right.
back to I'm back in Los Angeles now. I teach at the at Hudson Tillotson University in Austin, Texas. I do that remotely, but I also
Oh,
teach around Los Angeles, and I have a weekly workshop that I conduct at the World Stage in Leimert Park, Billy Higgins' room at the World Stage.
oh. That's great. Okay, so let me like Eric Reed, educator. You just explained to us kind of the super organic. I mean, it's not everyone that like a family friend knows Bobby Timmons and they come over to the house to show a 2-year-old how to play the piano. How do you translate your experience as a jazz musician to someone that's paying often big dollar to learn this music? How do you keep this real?
Every student is different. Some students can really, really hear well, and some students need that theory. And the gateway, of course, Kind of Blue. That is the record that so many people have cited as being an accessible record in terms of getting into jazz or what got them into jazz. And it's such a great place to start because of Miles Davis's solo on So What. So, two things for the musician who can really hear, transcribing that is easy. For the musician who really can't hear, there's the theory. Miles Davis is playing on the Dorian mode. And he sticks strictly inside of that mode. He doesn't play any non-chordal tones until he's getting ready to go into the E flat minor chord. But for the most part, he's playing just on the white keys. But that's two choruses of sheer melodic and lyrical brilliance, which was Miles Davis's whole impetus, being this melodic lyrical genius, not being the powerhouse trumpet player that Dizzy Gillespie or Lee Morgan or any of his peers, Clifford Brown, Art Farmer, Nat Adderley, Donald Byrd. They're a few years younger, but all of those cats could play circles around Miles Davis, trumpet wise, from a technical standpoint, from the sound of the trumpet, from just playing clear, clean lines. But when it came to being lyrical, Miles was in a class all by himself. And to be able to take a mode and stay just within that chordal sound or that melodic scalar sound and be as melodic as he was. I mean, to this day, it has to resonate, at least for me, as one of the greatest solos in all of recorded jazz music. Um, because of the economy, because of the space, because of the lyricism. And you have to be rhythmically hip too. You can't just be random. The way he structured those melodies rhythmically, the syncopation, the accent, just two choruses of absolute brilliance. I place it in the same space as Louis Armstrong West End Blues. I place it in the same space of greatest recorded solos because of when you analyze how it was structured and you analyze the intellectual process of it and then its impact on improvisation. And my album Out Late, Kind of Blue, is definitely a strong influence on the overall project with regard to the fact that we came in with no expectations came in with some sketches, put musicians in a different context. You know, you listen to Cannonball and Coltrane on something like Blue and Green or Flamenco Sketches. They totally had to modify, because we know Train and Cannon could just rip their instruments to shreds. But Miles said, "Yeah, I know y'all could do that, but I want y'all to just play off of these. You got to do the voice. You have to do the voice." Uh, so yeah, that's how I instruct. That's how I teach, from the standpoint of trying to combine something that will benefit the people who can really hear, and something that's going to benefit the people who don't hear as well but understand and are able to apply the theory.
Okay. Very cool. Before I let you go here, are there record release engagements? Are you guys going to be at Smoke to unveil this project, or what's coming up next for you?
We're trying to nail that down. Listen, just the fact that we were able to get the 5 of us together for that recording, that took almost a year and a half to coordinate, because everybody's working so much. Like with musicians like that, one of the reasons that it's such a challenge is because everybody wants them. So trying to find 5, 6, 7 days to do a record and then a performance was a nightmare. But it's a beautiful thing that they're working. So we're still trying to figure that out. It's not easy to do, trying to get all those schedules together. But we'll do something, I'm sure.
Okay.
I am doing a release event on May 16th, but in Los Angeles at Lockman, at the museum in Lockman, on May 16th.
Where was with the same band?
No, it's going to be with some Los Angeles musicians, Mike Garola on bass and Marcello Corelli on drums.
Okay. Very cool. All right, Eric, the record is out late. Smoke Sessions out on May 16th, man. Beautiful record. Thank you for the conversation, man. And we will hopefully hear and see you soon.
Thank you so much, David. I appreciate you.
Likewise, man. Liner Notes is grateful for the support of Van Doren Reeds and Mouthpieces. Be sure and check out the Van Doren Advisory Studio in New York City for all your sound sculpting needs. Liner Notes is grateful for the support of Arlen's Good Beer in Bowling Green, Ohio. Engineered by Marco Mendoza. Visit his website at engineeredbymarco.com. The theme music is Hide, Seek, Find from the record Beatitude, out on Tiger Turn. Produced by David Bixler. Be sure and subscribe to Liner Notes wherever you find your podcasts. If you like what you hear, I ask that you consider supporting Liner Notes financially. You can do this by going to the Liner Notes tab at davidbixler.com. Thank you for your consideration.